And we are live. Welcome to Live Action Roleplay with...
And Kai Norman.
And Ryan Omega. Oh, wow. This is what happens when you do tech and you forgot to check all the things. I guess we can't start over, but thank you for joining us here on our role-playing / LARP podcast and joining us today on the topic of World of Darkness, role-play and community. Introduce yourself, please.
Hi, I'm Jason Carl. I'm the brand marketing manager for the World of Darkness, host of LA by Night, Seattle by Night, and I'm very happy to be here with my friends again. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thanks for coming. Virtually.
Yeah.
Yes. In the grand tradition of doing our podcast, we first ask, what are you drinking right now? Sin.
I'm drinking sake.
All right. Kai.
I just recently found this really nice ginger soda that is apparently it's got a cult following. It's called Werner's. I really like it, and it's really hard to get out in California, but it's super tasty. So if you know what it tastes like, hey.
Jason.
Well, my drinking vessel is on brand, but I just have water.
Nothing wrong with that. Staying hydrated is good. I am having this thing that I got at the grocery outlet, the coconut milk beverage. It's actually pretty tasty, and it's only 99 cents, so there we go.
So we just established that I'm the lush of the group.
This is on brand for you, Sin.
Yeah, great, thanks. I'm not the one that has the handle Vino in it.
I don't know what you mean.
Wait, 1 moment. Does that mean the vampire players are throwing shade?
Yes.
Moo. Only on this podcast post.
Why should tonight be different than any other night?
I will be taking a note.
Ooh, I've heard that before somewhere.
Yeah.
And shout outs. Does anybody have any shout outs that you want to give today? Kai, we'll start with you.
I feel kind of bad. So next episode I will, but right now I can't announce it yet because Dystopia Rising NorCal hasn't announced it yet, but there is a certain person that I will be mentioning in our next episode. So right now, no. Sorry.
No worries. Sin.
I have to give a shout out to a specific woman, but in a general sense. So my hairdresser is Jessica. She is also a fellow LARPer. She's going through some issues while we're in quarantine in terms of obviously not being able to work right now. So my shout out really is actually to all the people who can't work right now. Like my love and my heart is there for you. And on the flip side, for those essential workers on the front line, but also the ones who aren't necessarily on the front line, but are making our lives easier day to day. Thank you so much for everything that you do. Like, even though we can't see what you're doing, just know that your work is recognized and we know what you're doing. So thank you.
Is that the same Jessica I think you're talking about?
Jessica Warburn?
Yeah, JPW.
Yeah.
She's wonderful. She's a lovely soul.
She is. So it's unfortunate that hairdressers are in phase 4. So they're not going back to work until almost August. And that's pretty tough on people's savings. So it's rough. So just my heart out to everybody.
Mm-hmm. Jason, any shout outs you want to give?
Yeah, Cynthia, that was really well said. Thank you. I'd like to shout out to the family. I see several of them here in the chat with us tonight. Thank you for joining us. Hello, hello. Welcome to our non-vampire story.
For me, my shout out, this is going to be very generic, but pretty much anyone at this point who is looking at the things that they have to do and they realize that it's very hard to get through the day. The fact that you even get through the day at all, I appreciate what you do. And I realize that's generic and that's for everyone, but I do appreciate that you're living in this time and surviving. So And thank you for tuning in as well. But hang in there. We hope that things will get better. They have to. They have to, as long as we try to stay safe, and hopefully everyone does. For tonight's topic, our topic for today is World of Darkness, roleplay and community. And this particular topic is kept very broad so that we can talk about anything in it, but I have no idea where to start with this. Sin, do you have an idea where you would want to start this topic?
Yeah. So, I mean, we're all stuck in quarantine at one point or another here, and it has been amazing to see roleplay communities really pull in virtually. So, I just kind of wanted to point to the positivity that each of our domains, if you will, vampire terminology, yeah, for just pulling together in a community. So I wanted to talk to Jason about how the World of Darkness is really pulling together as a community virtually in this time of need.
Good start.
I practiced.
So let me say this about that. We may play nocturnal, marauding, blood-drinking undead creatures, but we're all human beings. And I think this is maybe the very first time, I know it's the very first time in my lifetime, that everybody on this planet, every community, is experiencing the exact same thing simultaneously. Really remarkable. And as you pointed out earlier, Ryan, it's been stressful. The chronic stress of the circumstances is very trying for everyone, and it creates a lot of, I think, challenges is the best word for it. I'm sure we could think of some other adjectives for everybody. LARP communities in particular, because of course, LARP relies on gathering in person, and so does tabletop role playing. The World of Darkness community has really impressed me in the way that they have come together on different channels across social media and Discord and forums to communicate with each other, to share stories about what they're all going through, to talk about how much they miss their friends, how much they miss role playing and LARPing together. And it's been remarkable to see that communication happen in real time. One of the things that we did at World of Darkness very recently to help grow and nurture our community is we hired a full-time community developer, Martina Zeek. Hi, Martina. Some of you may know her as Outstar from her YouTube videos. Oh, check it out. Guru. No? Gangrel? I'm not sure. I've also seen a lot of World of Darkness communities continue to engage with each other online using all kinds of different virtual tabletop software to continue telling stories with each other. And I've even seen some LARPs start to use software like Discord and Zoom to try to bring some of that energy from their normal live action game back into the community. There's one vampire LARP in Sweden, I'll give them a shout out now, called the Dead River Company, that is inviting international players from all over the world to participate in their vampire LARP. And they're using a combination of video and still photography and Discord and chat to simulate that experience in online environment. It's very impressive.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds rad. Actually, do you mind if I ask a question here?
Go for it.
So at least with my experiences of vampire, some of the vampire LARPs that I've played have been very determined by downtime actions as well as the actual actions in game. Do you think, especially when it comes to vampire LARPs, since they have that predisposition for downtimes, do you think that kind of gave them a little bit of an edge in this current environment that we're going through, Jason?
I certainly think that it eases the transition. I think it's fair to say that many LARPs, not just vampire LARPs, do have a pretty significant downtime component in which, between game experiences, players continue to engage with each other, both in character and out of character online, to plan, plot, scheme, and generally map out what they're going to be doing. Some of them even role play online. I think that LARP communities that were doing this already definitely have an advantage as we transfer to a world where we can't get together in person. Vampire, in particular, I think, is really well suited to that kind of shared storytelling online.
Do you think with the general darker tones of Vampire that even playing vampire games right now would be more cathartic in a time like this? Or do you feel that people are shying away and going towards lighter things to deal with the situation?
It's an excellent question. I spend a lot of time thinking about this. My role with World of Darkness as the brand marketing manager is to try to understand what our fans want from the World of Darkness and figure out the ways in which we are going to give that to them and share it with them. And you might think that that it might be difficult to play those nocturnal blood drinking undead vampires at this time, but what we are seeing is that Vampire continues to be a game very much about humanity, and even dark stories can be humane at their core. And Vampire has a lot to teach us about not only the darkness of the world, but how we recognize that darkness and how we deal with it in our own lives. It's a way to come to understand isolation, and it's a way to come to understand hardship and challenge, about trying to maintain hope in a world that often seems very difficult and challenging. I think that Vampire is a game very much for this time.
And as for you, Jason, I know we may have asked this in the past, but how did you get started into this life of vampire?
No one knows. It was dark. There were people. I was really very, very fortunate. I've been involved in the World of Darkness for all of my adult life, so that's what, 109, 110 years at least. I got started when I bought a copy of Vampire the Masquerade the day it was released at Gen Con 30 years ago next August, as a matter of fact, 30 years from this coming August. And I couldn't find anybody to play with me at first. My friends were all still playing other role-playing games when I returned to Seattle. But I discovered almost accidentally Vampire LARP that was happening in the vicinity. And so my very first experience with Vampire was as a LARPer. I didn't get to play tabletop, I think, for almost 6 months after I bought the book. And since then, I've been involved with it as a fan and as a community organizer, as a freelancer, as a licensee. And now today, I have the incredible privilege of making it my full-time life. It's really a dream come true.
That is so cool. Hey, we have our first question. It's Lisa Marie. Sorry, I don't have my glasses on, so it's a little hard to read. So I'm just gonna get to the question. Getting ready to storytell for the first time in 1940s Hollywood, Vampire the Masquerade. That is awesome. Any advice for first-time storyteller? She's a little bit nervous. Anybody, take the question. Go for it.
1940s Hollywood, dope setting.
Yeah.
I might say the first thing, check out, there's a new Penny Dreadful series that's actually based in that time period. I've watched one episode and it's really good. It might give some inspiration points just to start off.
Also, Netflix also released Hollywood, which is also set in the 1940s, literally in Hollywood land. So that's also another good option to watch. It is from Ryan Murphy, the same creators for American Horror Story. So that is also a good inspiration to check out.
I was going to say, in running a game like that, it sometimes helps if you do have at least a list of maps, or I mean, a list of places and maps, so that when you start describing the world, that you can reference very particular things, because it definitely formulates a nice setting in people's heads. And just as Sin and Kai mentioned, like thinking about the fashion, thinking about like what the news was like, will totally influence that story. So bringing a little bit of realism will bring a lot of fantasy to your story.
Mr.
Jason?
Carl?
Yeah, good. I think that's all good advice. Those are great sources of inspiration. Lisa, the advice I'll offer you is the same advice I give to every first-time storyteller, but it's still helpful, I hope. And that is, before you play, before anybody creates a character, before you roll any dice, sit down together virtually, if you're playing virtually, and talk with each other about your expectations. Share with each other what you all hope to get from the experience and what your hopes are for the chronicle. And that's true for you as the storyteller too. I think the thing that derails chronicles most often and most quickly is different expectations that nobody talks about. When one player comes to the table hoping that it's a hard-boiled noir detective investigation story, and the other would really like to be shooting things with Tommy guns at all times, you can have both. But if you don't know that that's what each player wants to do, sometimes the chronicle can get off to a very slow or difficult start, and then you have to course correct. So we call that the session zero, setting expectations, and basically just talking about how are we all going to have fun together with this. I think that's always really helpful.
I'm pretty sure Lisa is one of the players in up in my Northern California game, and they've been kind of making wonderful waves in Dystopia Rising. But one of the things that we always try to do there is just listen, always. And yeah, the game zero is incredibly powerful. Sometimes it, Jason, have you ever had any trouble like working with your players, like trying to find out what they like if they don't even know what they like, or
Sure.
has that not been an issue for you?
No, I think there is always the possibility that a player may not know what expectations they have for the experience. Sometimes that's because the player is brand new to the experience. They don't have anything to compare it to yet. And usually that's a matter of trying to find an analogy, trying to find out what kind of films do they like, or in TV shows, or what other role-playing games do they play. Trying to figure out where their interest comes from can help predict what they want. And sometimes it's because really the player has no opinion because they like everything. How about you, Kai? Has that happened to you before? Where players just don't know what they want to do?
A little. Sometimes we've had newer players, at least in the LARP, trying to get they're more trying to experience the world and see what's available, almost like reading a menu at a restaurant, while we're trying to be a waiter being like, you can pick anything. What would you like? And so there's that like kind of pause moment that sometimes can be a little awkward, but it's fun to work past. Where you get to learn a little about them and they get to learn a little bit about you, and maybe someone's learning a bit more about themselves as well.
We have another question from Table Goth, and let's pose it to the round robin here. How would you compare a convention LARP, like at Gen Con, to one organized independently?
Independently, I'm assuming that is a more, so I don't know, that could go two ways. So I'm gonna kind of phrase it more of a one shot, kind of like what we experienced with you, Ryan, in Bruce's game, versus what the convention LARP is like. So a convention LARP to me, what's really cool and awesome about it is that you get to meet folks who are in the same LARP community but from different places, and where all of your stories finally converge onto onto one place for a couple of nights or one night or wherever. So you get the benefit of meeting characters that perhaps you heard other folks talking about, which I think is really cool, and you finally get to put a face to the name. But it's in terms of pushing story, at least for me as a gosh, when I played in a convention game, I was more of a brand new player, so I didn't have a whole lot at stake other than just kind of like learning people's names and learning what other people do. Versus when you do something more that's an organized, independent kind of game, you get the one-on-one sort of deal where your storyteller or storyteller team knows a little bit more about what you want to bring to the game. So kind of what we were just talking about earlier, what you expect from the game, they know that better, so they can provide that kind of experience. So to me, I enjoy more organized, independent stuff because I get to really focus in on what I want to experience rather than like the big like Disneyland LARP community thing.
Kai, how would you answer that question?
I'll be perfectly honest. I don't think I've ever actually played a convention LARP. I've when I've seen them happen, they've been times where I've just not been into LARPing, and so I always just kind of, they were either private or they were in like a kind of a public kind of walkway park area kind of thing, and it looked like people were having a ton of fun, but I didn't really interact much with them. I'd imagine, I mean, the trickiest thing that I would see between a one shot and something that you're kind of running on the regular would be that you have to probably have your finger a little more on the pulse of people playing responsibly. That would be my guess. I like the idea of a lot of just kind of making new friends from faraway places, like Sin mentions. I think that's really interesting. It'd be a lot of fun. But I do apologize. I haven't actually played in a convention LARP, so I don't feel like I can really give too much more opinion on that right now.
Jason, how would you answer that question?
I answer it by wishing I had something stronger to drink right now, as I remember all the convention LARPs that I've helped to organize and all the independent LARPs that I've run as a storyteller. So,
cheers.
cheers. And I love them both. They both have things to offer, and they're both good at very different things. I'm going to hazard a guess that Table Goth means by an independent LARP, like a long-running serial chronicle that recurs regularly, monthly or weekly or bi-weekly or what have you, rather than the convention, which is usually 1, 2, or 3 nights. So, and that's the biggest difference, right? One is self-contained. It's got a finite amount of time to run, and that creates, certain story expectations and certain story pressures on both the organizers and the players. And the other recurs regularly, so the stakes are usually very, very different. In a regularly recurring LARP, often the players can afford to plan long term, and they can work toward their goals over a longer period of time. In a convention LARP, the player character has just a few nights to accomplish whatever it is that they are there to do, whether it's to obtain the MacGuffin magical artifact or get an introduction to the Seneschal or slay the Minotaur or marry the Minotaur, whatever it is. You've got a finite amount of time. So that pressure often creates a sense of urgency, and all players feel it in the convention LARP. And so everyone's, I think, working through the story at a heightened speed. And that creates a really unique dynamic environment that's very different often from a regular serial LARP.
For me, who has organized LARPs at conventions as well as private independent games, what I have noticed is it depends more if you're talking about a long-term chronicle and a one-shot, but regardless of setting, it's very similar. So if you are talking about a few nights or a single game, you will see a lot more role-playing risk because they know that regardless of at the end of the 3 days, your game is over. So you can make bolder choices. But even in convention games or independent games, if you are in a long-term chronicle, people are thinking more about how they are building their characters, and they're thinking about the relationships they are forming. So they're almost different types of role play based off of the length of time you think you're going to invest in it, more than being in a convention or independent. I will say, however, for convention LARPs, if they're like a network chronicle, what I tend to find is more people will travel far, mostly to visit their friends, and the gameplay is a little bit secondary. However, it's a nice place, it's a nice time for people to meet up with friends from different parts of the world and then bring in their characters. And for independents, especially closed LARPs, where it's not necessarily open, but you get to invite certain people based off of their friendship or particular types of role play, you can go deeper into role play because there's already an innate sense of trust built into that game. So at least that's the way I compare those two.
So, follow-up question to everybody. What is your favorite version of LARP? Do you like the convention one-shot contained stories, or do you like playing the I don't know, the public game, the closer games? Go for it, Kai. You have your hand up.
I'm a big fan of long form buffer LARPs, like the long campaigns where you get involved and you're playing either monthly or bi-monthly, like every other month or something like that. Those are by far some of my favorite ones because they keep me physically active, and I feel like I can lie to myself and consider that physical exercise. So I'm allegedly taking care of myself, even though I'm not drinking, eating, or sleeping. And there's just a lot more potential for like long-term interaction. And the thing that I enjoy by far and large of all kind of role play, and Jason, when you were talking about the depth and the reasons why vampire in particular is like the tones and emotions that you can explore in vampire, something that I thought about for all roleplay really is your character has far more ability to sway the world than in real life. And it's unfortunately a little sad to think of it like that to a degree, but it's also kind of exciting because role play is escapism. It's healthy. You go off and you enjoy yourself and you're doing something fun. And so being able to shape the world in a very drastic and radical way that you would have a lot of trouble doing in real life can be incredibly cathartic. And I find that those things happen the most in bigger, long form kind of LARPs.
Jason, what about you?
I'm hesitating because I'm not sure of my own answer. They both have so much to recommend them, right? Currently, in my life where I'm really pressed for time, one shot and limited edition series LARPs are a lot more convenient, and so I prefer those. We've all played together in some really truly extraordinary one shot LARPs, both vampire and other genres, and they were incredible experiences. And of course, I've spent many happy nights in long form serial chronicles as well. But I approach them very differently. With the long form LARP, I do have goals, of course, for my characters. It's really important to set goals for your characters. But in those LARPs, I'm usually looking for those fantastic, intense, emotional role play moments, first and foremost. In the limited LARPs, convention LARPs, or one nights or one shots, I just want to meet my goals and make sure that my character fulfills whatever it is the storyteller wants me to be there for. Cynthia Marie?
Oh, my turn. I
Mm-hmm.
I like convention LARPs, mainly because somebody in this chat was the one who introduced me to LARP and spoiled me when I went to Vegas and did this amazing LARP. And ever since, I was like, all right, so like we got to do the same thing here. Like I got to like amp it up one more level. So I actually like the self-contained one one shot, let's go big or go home. Which is interesting. You bring up goals. For me as a LARPer, like I'm a how you call it? I'm a leaf in the wind. Like I just kind of just go with it. Like I don't really set goals, which I probably should work on that. I just kind of go with what the story like sweeps me up in. Like I for buffer LARPs, I like to fight. So anytime I hear someone say, "Hey, there's a battle," I'm like running like mad to get over there. So it's not like I had the goal essentially of like I'm gonna fight in every fight. It just kind of sort of happened. With Vampire, my goal is really, this is really mean. This is Vampire LARP, not Vampire Tabletop. I want to be very specific. Vampire LARP, like, probably if I were to set a goal, was really to just like fuck over whoever it was that was in front of me. Sometimes.
This is accurate. This is accurate.
Mainly because it's as the Toreador that I played, she was very set on being a harpy, and people kept kind of screwing her over. So she was just kind of like, "All right, cool, you guys gonna do that? Then like, cool, I'm gonna just like screw you guys over too." So like, if I had a goal, that's what it was for that particular vampire. Nellie's a whole other story. She actually does have goals, but that's tabletop versus LARP. So yes, one shot convention LARPs. Yes, Ryan, over to you.
I like them both. The bigger determining factor is who am I playing with, more than choosing long form over short form. Being in Hollywood Forever with all of you was probably one of like my most favorite role-playing groups ever, just because I was able to trust everybody and we were able to do like just crazy things. Also, I love being able to role play with Jason because you're such a great RP partner.
That was great. That should have been a mini TV series, I think. Buddy Archons.
Buddy Archon should have been a TV series between Archon Kincaid and Archon Davey. It will be one day, I swear.
Hold on. As somebody who was up against the two of you, y'all were terrifying.
Mission accomplished.
Yay! We intimidated our people. There was this one crazy moment I'll always remember when the prince started to cite Camarilla law, and both of us just kind of looked at each other at the same moment across the room and went at the exact same time. And looking at the entire Primogen Council just dropped the jaws like, what the fuck just happened? And it was just a super cool moment that I'll always remember, because like it was because we were just in such sync, even though we were in opposite parts of the room. And that was great.
It was a great moment. That was a lot of fun. I felt almost bad for the prince. Not quite, but almost.
Almost, but no.
No,
they're prince. They need to earn their position in front of Archons.
I'm glad I did not become prince in front of the Archons. Hi.
So I think I have a little bit of a question to you, Jason, and it might even work well for you guys' opinion, the rest of us on this. I was thinking about how in Vampire especially, at least when it comes to the LARP, in tabletop it's a lot more cooperative, but in Vampire LARP it's a little, well, not a little, more competitive. Wouldn't you agree? Mm-hmm. So with that in mind, do you think that...
I don't, but I want to come back to that.
Okay, great. And honestly, I'm interested in this. So my question is, do you think Vampire as a LARP requires a bit more kind of emotional maturity and communication than other LARPs because of some of those natures of it being a very, or at least from my perception, a very competitive political game?
Awesome question and cool topic. You could do a whole show just on this. I think that any LARP can be competitive. I've played in LARPs that were extraordinarily competitive that weren't Vampire LARPs, and I've played in Vampire LARPs that were intensely collaborative and non-competitive, or were competitive with a very specific informed type of play style that made it easy to be competitive without without being too concerned about some of the issues that you're referring to. But I think that no matter what game you're playing, whether it's Vampire LARP or a Boffer LARP or Survival Horror LARP, or any role-playing experience for that matter, the players have a responsibility to engage in considerate play and responsible play, no matter what it is. And that includes setting the right boundaries with each other before any play starts, talking about where the areas are that are just not going to be addressed in the game, and how you're going to manage those feelings of bleed, whether they're about competition or sadness or fear. And I think that LARPs that engage in that kind of considerate play can dive right into the competitive nature of Vampire that is really the hallmark of the unlife of the kindred, and they can do so safely and responsibly. Arguably the best Vampire LARP I ever played in my life was intensely competitive, but amazingly cooperative too. And that's because there were no secrets. Everyone could see each other's character sheets at all times. In fact, we knew it was on everybody's sheets before we even went into the Chronicle. Everybody could read each other's backgrounds, and we just told each other what our goals were, and we tried our best to help each other as players achieve those goals together in the LARP. And that was really a revelatory experience for me as far as playing Vampire goes. That was a longer answer than you wanted, I think, Kai.
No, not at all. I really enjoyed hearing it. Do my classmates have anything they want to comment on, or should I do a follow-up?
First of all, like the thing that you just mentioned, Jason, almost sounds very contrary to all of the Vampire LARP that I know, where everything is an open book, that there are no secrets, and it actually sounds refreshing. And I want to play a game like that once just to see what that's like, because that is such a weird concept to me, having played Vampire LARP since 2000. I'm like, wait, what? What is this?
It's a very different play style, and you'll find it in not just Vampire LARPs, other kinds of LARPs as well. But it does require a different mindset. You've got to tilt your head sideways a little bit to understand the fact that sharing all that information right up front with everybody is not going to unfairly prejudice the role play.
I would say that for me, having played in a lot of Vampire and seeing and playing in different Chronicles, the competitiveness or the CVC, character versus character, factor in a Vampire game will really be determined by how much does the in-character structure of the Prince and the Seneschal and all of the officers work closely with the story staff. And when I say that, I mean that a Chronicle that has good story staff and clear communication between its in-character power structure as well as its out-of-character power structure can create better role play, more stories. But if the storytellers and the hierarchy of the in-character officers are constantly combating, you're going to end up with a lot of very, very combative situations, sometimes things that are not even necessary, because suddenly you now have a staff that's trying to screw over your hierarchy, and then the hierarchy doing that back, and people caught in the middle will not last long because this is not pleasant. Or people will jump into that thinking that they'll be okay with it, but so much metagaming becomes unpleasant after a while. So I find that responsible princes that clearly communicate with their storytelling staff make for better roleplay situations in a Vampire LARP.
So I would like to add, at least with my experiences, I'm going to talk about the idea of coterie. In the LARPs that I'm sorry?
Cheese boards? I'm messing with you. Never mind. Please continue.
Oh, charcuterie instead of coterie. Roger that. I was like, what is he talking about? No, coterie. I mean, unless you want to get that cheesy, in which case, go for it. Um, anyway, so coterie within LARP, at least from what I have experienced, has always been this secretive group that you aligned with really powerful people, and you kept it all secret. Nobody knew anything that that group was working on, and if you were found out, like basically that group was like killed off or tortured or disbanded or whatever. So it became this kind of competitive nature of like, who's the most powerful person I can grab onto my team, who's the sneakiest person, like just so I can get all those people and I can run the game, sort of a deal. What I enjoy about V5 the most is the idea that we are in a coterie together and we have to work together, and the whole story is about how this, and I use our show, the dysfunctional family, has to work together regardless of our differences, and in the end becomes this collaborative and non really competitive group. So I think that V5 really did a great job of revamping that sort of world and bringing it back into a community sense instead of a competitive sense. So those of you who are playing V5, I would highly recommend it because it's not as competitive. You're competitive against your storyteller. You want to beat your storyteller.
Hey.
Just say. Got to outsmart your storyteller.
Keep them on their toes.
Not sure I like
And
where this is going.
also, if I may do a shameless plug, y'all, like I just bought the beautiful Level Up dice set. I got the Toreador set. Check those out. Don't mind my nails because I just ripped them all off, but look at that. This is a blood die. This is your regular die. They're like gorgeous.
Those are just beautiful.
You got to pick them up. They're really nice weighted 10-sided dice. I love them. Jason, you play with them. What are your thoughts on them?
On the dice from Level Up, I use them too. Yeah, I think they're marvelous. They have a really nice heft in your hand. When I'm rolling behind my screen and not telling the players what I'm rolling for, I just love how they feel and the sound that they make.
Yeah, we hear the sound from far away, and it's like, oh god, what is he rolling?
Well, now that I know that you're competing against me, I feel a lot less bad about it.
Well,
Is the Toreador logo a 10 or a 1 or 0? 1.
It's a 0, so it's a 10.
Yeah,
that's
nice.
The good stuff.
I prefer dice that if they're going to have a custom logo, that it's the highest possible number rather than the lowest.
Well, in Vampire 5th edition, it's a pass-fail system. So there's only really 2 symbols that count. Blank, which is fail, and then a symbol, which is success.
Okay.
So that's why you don't see them numbered that way.
So Jason, for our newer players who may not have actually seen the new dice, would you mind explaining either that?
Sure.
Or that?
If I do that, though, then I have to talk about hunger.
Oh, yes. Talk about hunger. It's an interesting mechanic.
So in all the years previous being involved with Vampire, we measured blood instead of hunger. Blood was sort of like a petrol tank, a gas tank, and you could be high on blood and low on blood. But the problem was, or at least for us, is that no one could really describe how does that feel? How does 10 blood feel? Well, it feels better than 9 blood, but you can't really describe it. But everybody's been hungry. We all know what it feels like to have missed breakfast or skipped lunch or gone without dinner. And we've all been so hungry that we've been angry. We've been hangry before. It's much easier to describe how hungry you get than how much blood you have. So Vampire 5th edition tracks hunger instead. And so we changed how the dice work for that reason. Whenever you make a die roll in Vampire 5th edition, you risk getting hungrier. And the hungrier you get, the closer to the beast you are, and the greater the risk of something terrible happening at a dramatically appropriate moment.
I dread those words.
Mm.
And also that you're taking a note. Those are also very dreadful words.
So that's why the dice have cool symbols on them.
I really like the sound of that. I think logo recognition is a nicer aspect rather than kind of picking, dice that are higher than a certain number or lower than a certain number and putting them in piles.
I think so. It's a lot faster, and there are many tabletop games, both board games and role playing games now, that make use of specialized dice to really good effect. I think the Star Wars role playing game does a great job at using special dice to make play faster and easier.
Nice. So if no one objects, I think I have something I wouldn't mind kind of bringing up as a possible discussion point. So earlier, when we were talking about responsible princes and things like that, communicating with the story staff, and the last thing you want to do is really breed a situation where the players are kind of versus the story team or something like that, because that always ends rather unhealthy. But I've always, and I absolutely agree with that. But it also makes me think of how interesting, like, the kind of microcosm of a LARP game can be. You have like a few actions that start to kind of a butterfly effect or snowball effect the way players respond to certain things. There was a little bit of a fun Twitter thing that people were doing, which was like unapologetic LARP tropes that they would kind of mention. And I mentioned something called bad candy, which is a terminology about if a module or a quest that goes out, the only way that a player can come out the other end of a bad candy quest is being punished. Basically, the only way to win a bad candy mod is not touch it. And you don't know it's a bad candy before you get involved. And ultimately, the only thing it does is kind of spread some misery and generally make the player base more suspicious of anyone that isn't another player introduced into the world. It's like, oh, the last 5 NPCs that came into town all were carrying bombs and blowing us all up. So now we don't trust those NPCs, and now the players are actively killing every stranger that enters town. What have you guys encountered any other kinds of interesting, I want to say tropes, but I don't think it's the right word, or made any interesting observations about how the interactions of story or players can kind of trend into something that becomes more of like a reflexive nature of the actual game kind of community? Does that make sense?
There is one trope that I know, which is not a pleasant one in LARP. And that is the idea that the people who are in power in a certain chronicle or game, as a result of the in-character hanging out, or the in-character like shared power structure, start hanging out outside of game. So suddenly it reinforces the need for that power clique to stay locked in without plot moving in and out. That is a problem in some games where your story staff and your hierarchy are so intermixed that's always going to be the same people in charge, and there's no upward or lowered movement. And that stifling of things usually will kill games.
Yeah, if like the political leaders of the game start becoming super cliquey and kind of gatekeepy. For those unaware, gatekeeping is preventing newer or less experienced or less powerful players from kind of getting involved in the plot that you're chasing. It's very much kind of more about gimme, 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 and less about let's share this space and tell a cool story. Yeah, it's unfortunate that can kind of happen, and I guess good storytellers, good DMs, and so forth need to be aware of some of those things kind of looming their head on the horizon.
I do want to transition. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know if anyone else wanted to answer that question, because it was a really interesting question in chat.
Go for the chat question.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go for the chat question. This question comes from Andy. Do you guys have any interesting moments when you, as the game master, tried so hard not to punish your players or pay back after they tempted you for so long?
Punish your players? Oh. No, I don't. That suggests an adversarial relationship between game master and player that really isn't my cup of tea or cup of wine. I think that it's very, very important in any role-playing game that there always be consequences for actions, however. So there are certainly circumstances in which I have gone out of my way to make sure that consequences for actions have been realized and felt. But I never think of it as a punishment or a pejorative.
I would like to extend that further, that I actually like to play on players' risk taking. So I constantly yes and my players when I have them in a situation. So if somebody were to throw a dagger and they have super strength, and we roll for it and they roll super high for it, I'm going to tell them that they overshot it and it fell over. So I'm not punishing my player for having tried something really cool, but rather gave them an even better story than like, oh no, you missed it. You can't do that, right? Like, you want to give them a better story. You would never want to punish your players by any sense.
I agree. I believe in consequences, not punishment, because every action should have an effect. Whether it's positive or negative can be determined by dice, even rock, paper, scissors, or just pure social role play. But punishing a player implies that you don't like something they did, and therefore you're not giving them an appropriate reaction. You're giving them your take on how you think the story goes, and giving them something that is like way out of line for the story, and the end result is that someone will leave that game feeling horrible. Worst case scenario, like that person will not want to play again because you extended that consequence to something that was not reasonable. If there were other mitigating factors that were explained in game, totally different story. But if you're just making someone an example, that's not storytelling at that point.
I agree with you completely. I think that's an excellent way to put it. Someone in the chat asked if this applied to me, particularly because a couple of my players in LA by Night really like to push their luck, or so it seems. The answer still is no. My role as a storyteller is to interpret the story, is to interpret the world of darkness. The world of darkness wants things, and my job is to realize what those wants are through the opportunities and the challenges that the players experience. But the players decide what their characters want to do, and if they take action that requires consequences from the world of darkness, I'm there to make sure that happens. But I wouldn't ever want to make them feel like I wouldn't want to make them feel like they didn't play the story the way I thought it should be played, which is, I think, what you were talking about, Ryan.
I'd have to say, Jason, playing in LA by Night with you, it's always been a collaborative experience. There's never been any like weirdness between all of us. It's always been like, how do we want to tell this story? And you're very open to all of our ideas and how they all fit into the world. So I think it's very collaborative, and bringing it back to the full story of this episode is it's very much a community between all of us.
If I may, real quick. From my personal experience, at least, the only time I've ever punished a player has been because they have breached the community contract, like the standards of the game. Like if they're cheating or treating people in real life inappropriately, or doing things like that, like breaking the social contract of the game. If they're doing silly or goofy or fucky or whatever kinds of things in character, so long as they're not like messing with people's boundaries, like consequence, that something happens in world, that doesn't mean that you should just kill them or take all their money away or something like that. Do everything to further the story, unless they are disrespecting the story on an out of character level, in which case you have a conversation with them and you make sure that they're following boundaries.
Super well said.
If you don't mind, we could do one more question before we wrap up.
Ooh, that's a really good one.
It's a really good one. Wow.
Wow.
And then we will definitely need to wrap up as we are getting over time. But yeah, so let's answer this one. Great question, by the way. Let me see. A question from Acornejo. How far do you plan out plot lines, knowing that the way the story unfolds by character's agency is more important than sticking to any one main outcome? How often have you had to throw out a plan completely because where the story ended up going was far more interesting? Such a good question.
Can I jump in real quick? I honestly don't have a stake in this question because I don't storytell as often, so I'm gonna bow out of this question.
Jason.
Where to begin?
Yeah.
The truth is that every time I sit in the storyteller's chair or stand at the storyteller's table, if it's a LARP, I end up discarding ideas that I had in favor of something that transpires organically because of player character choices. As I said a few minutes ago, I'm there to interpret the world, whether it's the world of darkness or the Forgotten Realms or 1920s New York City, whatever it is I'm running. And for me, it's important to know what the NPCs want, what their goals are, what their hopes and desires and dreams are, how far they will go to get what they want, what they will and they will not do. And apart from that, however, I try not to plot out events too much more than where we are starting from at the beginning of the game. As long as I know what all the other characters in the world want and what they'll do to get it, the player characters can do anything that they want to do. And I should be able to interpret the world in such a way that it creates an opportunity for dramatic and fun story. But I have no idea where the plot will go once we start. That's up to the players.
That's half the fun of it, right?
That's definitely half the fun, maybe more than half the fun.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and then seeing their faces when, the story they thought you were telling turns out not to be the story that you're telling.
Mm-hmm.
I like that part too.
That's happened a lot.
I like that part.
Something that my storytelling team in my game usually refer to this as a reactive plot. They throw out kind of ideas in our storytelling meetings, and then the best ones we make mods out of and then put into the game world. And sometimes in those we do write out our projections on if they do this, this might happen. If they do that, this might happen. But almost always the players do the third option, which is something you don't even plan for anyway. So I find the older a game is and the more you get used to your players, the more you can kind of plan ahead. But when you're starting out early, the more generalized you keep things, and that doesn't mean diluting the story, but the more generalized that you keep things, the better game you're going to have. Because, other than just preparing yourself to think on your feet when you're creating content for them during the game.
I know on my show of Blank Slate, it happens so often where over a 6-week period, I will have written a story that's supposed to last 4 weeks long, a single player action that takes place in a few seconds will literally destroy something I've plotted for 4 weeks. And instead of getting upset, I come in with a philosophy, and that is a game that is fully collaborative with my cast of 10 or 15 players will come up with a better story than I can come up with alone. And because of that philosophy, I don't mind that 4 weeks of writing suddenly went away, because the ending that came on the show is something we'll talk about longer than the 4 weeks I planned for it.
Story is like a story in LARPs and roleplay games are kind of like a living, breathing creature. And it's almost like a child at times. There's things that you can see that you've definitely created within it, but then it starts to kind of shape and shift in ways that you never predicted. Hell, if you make a player character, and within the first 5 minutes of playing this character, suddenly you've got an accent that you never saw coming, and you're like, well, guess I'm rolling with this. That type of stuff happens, and it happens organically. And I think the organic nature of LARP, more often than not, can create things that seem so perfectly written that there's no way someone could have planned for it, because it's just this butterfly cascade effect of amazing perfect moments that happen. And it can really make your game at times. And those moments are beautiful. And like, as a storyteller, I love hearing about the random shit that I didn't even intend happening at my game, and my players love it. Because it's, you know, the world that you've built for them, as Jason said, and you're just watching them play in the sandbox that you made for them.
On that note, it's time to wrap up our show. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Live Action Roleplay. If you want to support us, there's 2 ways to do that. You can follow us here on our Twitch channel, our new Twitch channel of Live Action Roleplay, so give us a follow. Otherwise, we always accept support on our Patreon so that we can continue to upgrade equipment and some other things, and we are planning to roll out more additional content. So before we go, let's go to Jason. And where can people find you on social media? And is there anything you want to say to the audience at this time?
Those are 2 different things. So the
Oh, yes, they are.
the easiest question to answer is where you can find me. Just type in my username, Vampires and Vino, in most social media platforms, and you can find me there. Try to keep it consistent. And what I want to say to everybody is thank you. The fact that we get to join you tonight and talk with you and share this conversation with you is truly miraculous. We couldn't have done this, a decade ago at all, maybe not even 5 years ago, not easily. And I really appreciate how this technology is allowing us to stay close as a community and to lift each other up and support each other, even when the world is in a very difficult place right now. Thanks for being here with us.
Hi.
You guys can find me on my usual things down here. Yokai Props, Instagram, Twitter, those types of things. And Jason, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us. Like, it's amazingly wonderful to hear the insight and the experience that you have. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Kai. It was great to be back.
Mm-hmm.
Sin.
Aside from finding me on Twitter down there, you could also find me on Instagram, Cynthia__Marie. I am going to be starting on a new D&D show called Soul Searchers. It's going to be on Sunday on Gilding Light. I'm very excited. I'm going to be playing a Kalishtar druid. I've never played a druid. This should be interesting. I don't know. But yeah, just follow me on the socials. I may have one other surprise show coming up, and I may be posting it in the next 24 hours. So stay tuned to that. And honestly, just again, Jason, thank you for your time, for being here. Like, I greatly appreciate it. It means the world to me that you moved heaven and earth just to come and hang out with us. So thank you.
I'd do it again.
We'll hold you to that.
Please do.
All right. You heard it here, guys. I'm Ryan Omega. You could find me on Twitter under Ryan OMGA, and on Facebook and Instagram under Ryan Omega. Tomorrow I will also be on Gilding Light on the continuing adventures of the Cypher System game, Zyra, which
cool.
I absolutely love, like, this character and our interactions. Like, come check it out. It happens 4 p.m. Pacific time. And next week, we will continue to have on Live Action Roleplay Tarot and Talk. Guests to be determined, because I'm looking for guests. But that is a show about the paranormal. And yesterday we had Ronnie Agogo, where we talked about divination, clairvoyance, clairaudience, all the clairs, and even bone divination. So check that out on our archives. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Hopefully everyone stays healthy, stays well, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.